Hello, as the dust begins to settle on yesterday's budget, I've asked two of London's leading financial planners to come into the Citywire studio and talk about what this means for everyone's personal finances. I'm delighted to say I've got Paula Steele, Managing Director of John Lamb.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Lee Robertson, Chief Executive of Investment Quorum. You can find details of their firms on our Advisor Finder tool on the Citywire Money website. But let's get down to business. Huge uproar about the plight of pensioners. Let's start at the basics. The thing that's getting everybody worked up is the freezing of age-related allowances. Paula, could you explain what's happened there?
At the moment, if you are over 65 and over 75, I think, you get additional allowances, which are tax-free monies that you can earn. You can have income, which are tax-free.
Mm-hmm.
Those everybody has tax-free allowances. Those allowances for the older people have actually now been frozen. So they will keep some additional allowance for the next couple of years, but after that, they won't be getting that extra tax-free income.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, it represents about an extra £400 a year that they get tax-free.
Yep.
Or after tax, they get £2,000, but it saves them £400 worth of tax.
Now that doesn't sound good, obviously, but the Chancellor has to balance the books, and people are saying counter-argument that pensioners have been relatively well shielded in the austerity years we've had so far. Lee, do you agree?
No, I don't. I would disagree with that. I think pensioners are always a special case. They're under assault on every angle at the moment. We have high inflation, we have low interest rates, we have pensioners on fixed income. They're being assaulted by the rise in domestic fuel bills, just the weekly shop. It's a very, very difficult time for them, and they have arguably far less wiggle room than those still in the working population who can perhaps earn more, save more, spend less. The pensioner doesn't have that flexibility, so I think this is really bad news for them.
It is. Because as you say, the rate of inflation that pensioners experience is higher than the rest of the population.
Much
higher.
And also, councils are now beginning to charge them so that where they need personal care at home, where before the council provided it for free, they're now making a charge.
Yep.
And an increasing number of things are charged for. And you know, we all see on the television that the couple who can't afford to put the heating on, there are going to be more of those. The winter fuel allowance isn't enough to cover the increase in terms of fuel bills. Okay,
so there's a hit there. The Chancellor announced that this was being accompanied by the introduction of the flat rate basic pension. I think a lot of people want to know a bit more about that. The flat rate's going to be £140?
Yeah, I think there's some good news there. There's been complexity down there in that because of means testing, which came in under the last government, there was actually a disincentive at a certain level to actually make pension contributions for yourself. Right. There's also a simplification going on. We've had this steady stream over the years of state second pensions, state earnings related pension scheme, etc., etc. So to simplify that down, I think this is probably a good move.
Okay.
They are getting an increase in their pension.
Exactly.
I had a look at it. I reckon that the whole thing in terms of extra pension, which gives them extra cash flow, but the extra tax meant that it was completely neutral. They aren't getting anything out of it.
Right.
George Osborne was on the television this morning saying, "Oh well, we're increasing the amount of pension," and just refused to engage.
He was sticking to this defence around simplification. PR-wise, it seems to have been a bit of a disaster. Lee?
Well, you've got some very media-savvy people batting on behalf of this segment of society, probably quite rightly. I mean, Ros Altman, if you've followed her Twitter, her tweets this morning, she's incandescent.
That's right. But it seems it's raised a lot of money. It's a big part of his budget in terms of balancing the books, and yet he's presenting it purely as a simplification when we know it really isn't just about that. It's revenue raising, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What about the kind of generation issue here? You know, we've got the Chancellor seeming to benefit people who are in work, younger people, with lifting the personal allowance for everybody.
It raises. I worked it out last night, and if you earn £43,000 a year, you're about £64 a year better off.
Is that all?
That's all.
Right.
Now, underneath that, you're actually quite a lot better off. Yeah. Because with the way they've moved the bands, I think it's about £360 a year that you're better off. But at that sort of 42,000 pinch point, it's £64.
Okay.
It's not a lot.
Right.
£8
So a small
month.
gain there, not as big as the loss that pensioners are experiencing.
No.
And there's more people being dragged into the higher rate tax
Well,
band.
I mean, as Paula says, they've moved the thresholds. They've actually pulled it down. The original premise of the 40% tax rate was it was meant to be for higher earners.
Yep.
And now it's, I think, for kind of average higher earners. We're probably talking about head of department in schools, maybe matrons in the hospitals, relatively senior people, but certainly not multimillionaires or millionaires. And that will raise a lot of revenue, I think.
Okay. We're talking about the plight of pensioners, of savers here. You've spotted something in the budget affecting maximum investment plans.
Yeah, the max investment plan, it's been around forever in one guise or another, but basically it's what's called a qualifying life policy. If you run it for 10 years or more, although it did pay tax internally, you got the proceeds tax-free.
Right. It's a kind of endowment.
It is, it's exactly right, but it had a very low level of life cover within it, just enough to make it a qualifying policy. Okay. Its objective was savings.
And were these, well used? Were they popular?
They come and go out of fashion, but they've become very popular recently because of the limits to what people could put into pensions. So in the hierarchy of tax-favoured savings plans, with pensions and ISAs, they certainly came back into vogue, particularly for higher earners.
I see. So as the limits were put onto the amount you could put into a pension, people have been putting money into MIPS. Yeah,
and you could argue that they're a disciplined long-term savings plan. And we keep saying as a nation we're not disciplined in saving long-term. Right. So it seems a slightly strange one to have a go at, although I understand why.
What's he done?
What he's done is he's capped it to $3,600 a year of contributions, which in effect will probably kill them off. Very few companies are going to run a plan of that small per annum. It's very difficult to make it work. Okay,
so that's a bit of a nasty there. Child benefit. We need to talk about that, Paula.
I think
you're not totally impressed, are you?
No. I think that in terms of child benefit, for those people who haven't sort of been following this, there's a certain amount of fanfare because the new provisions will now kick in for people who are earning 50,000, where before it was 40,000. So this was said it was a great relief. If you're earning over 50,000, from the 7th of January next year, you are going to start to lose your child benefit if you are in receipt of child benefit. Mm-hmm. It was always seen as being relatively unfair that if you have a couple both earning 45,000 a year, you will lose no child benefit. If you have a couple with one earning 55,000, you are effectively going to lose, well, certainly one earning 60,000, you're going to lose all of the benefit of the child benefit.
Right.
And the basis on which they are going to impose that is actually very complicated.
Right. So the Chancellor, who's talking about simplification of tax, has actually made this partial improvement of the cutback he's making on child benefits
it's
a lot more
very
complicated.
And everybody's going to have to file it on their self-assessment.
So loads more people doing self-assessment as a result?
Yes, everybody will, anybody who's going to be getting child benefit and you've got earnings at 40, well, if you're a high rate taxpayer, I think they want you to do a self-assessment anyway.
Right. Oh dear, well, I'm really going off this budget. Okay, another topic is is property. And, George Osborne made a big play about the clampdown on wealthy people and avoiding stamp duty. There's Lee, you're particularly interested in I think the 15% levy.
Well, I think
that's being imposed on people who buy these big properties, £2 million plus, mainly in London, through a corporate shelter.
I think nobody can be surprised. There's been a lot of, so much of this budget was leaked ahead of time anyway. I think probably the worst one ever for that. But
what's amazing, all he left was a granny tax. That's what it was a PR.
We knew this was coming.
disaster.
I think that people were using companies to buy property and were avoiding this. So something had to come along. We found it wasn't just Russian oligarchs. It was media people. It was rock stars, etc. Footballers buying property this way to avoid the tax. So I think it had to come. 15% seems about right.
Okay, so it doesn't set any nasty precedents for.
In addition to the 15%, there is also an annual SDLT charge, which was quite buried.
Right.
If you're buying property,
SDLT being stamp duty,
land tax. Sorry. Now, most of us are not buying houses at 10 million, but at 10 million, that annual tax charge is 140,000. And it starts off at 15,000 at 2 million, 14,000. It's holding property through companies, as somebody said to me, is now suboptimal.
Right.
And there'll be an awful lot of people moving stuff around in the next 12 months because they've got until April 2013 to sort it out and get the properties out.
Well, talking of kind of deadlines and things, I mean, that's a measure that affects, you know, a relatively small number of very wealthy people. What about more ordinary people, about the mass of the population? What is their response? What should they do, can they do to kind of ameliorate the impact of some of these tax reforms?
It's going to be no surprise, is it? But
You must buy your ISAs.
Right.
You can put 10,680 in for you.
Why are ISA so important in this context?
Because it's tax-free. Everything that's within it, well, actually, it's not quite.
it's virtually tax.
It's virtually tax-free.
And there is inheritance tax to be paid.
Right.
Yeah.
But shelter as much of your money, your income, as you can, if you can afford to save it.
I think do nothing's not an option. It's pensions, it's pensions for non-working spouses, it's ISAs, it's junior ISAs, as much as you can, get it put away. The other thing that probably just worth touching on is for those people who've legitimately used offshore bonds for tax planning, they have to have a look at those now because some of the tax advantages there are being withdrawn too. Right,
well, we'll keep an eye on that one. Lee, Paula, thanks very much for your time. I know you've got to get back to your back to work and talk to your clients about some of these changes. In the meantime, we'll be following up on some of these points. But thank you very much for the debate.
Pleasure.